Welcome to Inspire Campfire, a podcast where ordinary people tell their stories of extraordinary adventure. These are campfire stories meant to inspire the rest of us to light the fire within, get outside, follow our dreams, and return to tell our own stories. Ready? Let's strike the match.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Scott Wurtzbacher, and today we're going to talk about making peace with the inevitable and finding courage to face our greatest fears. Today's guest has been literally diving into situations that require an amazing trust that all will be okay. Tyler Stallings, the Moto Photo Guy, is with us today from Reno, Nevada. Tyler is an adventure photographer and digital creator who both participates in and captures adventures for others to watch. Inspired by the movie Into the Wild, Tyler recently took a 5-week solo trip on his motorcycle from Reno, Nevada to the Arctic Ocean. And on his way, he stopped to participate in a project to film, of all things, a group of cliff divers in Oregon. For most of his life, Tyler has thrown himself into situations requiring the most extreme levels of courage, and he's here to share that story with us today. Tyler, welcome to the campfire.
How's it going? Stoked to be here.
Man, I am so excited. You have all kinds of adventure threads throughout your whole life, but I want to just dive right in because your most recent adventure that you did this year was a 5-week solo motorcycle trip from Reno all the way to the Arctic Ocean. Can you tell us a little bit about this adventure?
Yeah, totally. It was awesome. I had such a good time. I already want to go back. I started out here in Reno, rode up through Oregon. I had about a week kind of stopover in Oregon, filming with some of my friends in a much larger group of cliff divers. So we were going to all these different waterfalls in Oregon, jumping off them, filming for a documentary film project that my buddy is directing. And after that, I headed off solo north. I went pretty fast through Washington just because I've been there so much. Got to the Canada border, and then kind of took my time going up all the scenic routes up through British Columbia, the Yukon. And then got onto a highway called the Dempster Highway, which was only recently completed. It connects the rest of Canada to the Arctic Ocean itself. It's a dirt highway, except for a very small section kind of towards the end, which is paved. But the dirt is, they maintain it, but just because it's in the Arctic and it's not on like solid ground like we're used to, it's up on the permafrost. The road gets damaged very frequently because it's constantly moving and freezing and thawing and all that. And so it's definitely not for the light of heart, especially on a motorcycle. People do it in all sorts of cars. Cars are a little bit easier. You just got to drive kind of slow because traction can be an issue. But on the motorcycle, you have the added difficulty of balancing, especially when you're loaded up with gear for a 5-week trip where you're camping off the bike. Made it up to the Arctic Ocean, camped there. I had absolutely terrible weather conditions the entire way up.
Wow. So 5 weeks on your motorcycle, bad weather, but you were camping the whole time, right?
Yeah. Over the 5 weeks, only 2 days I didn't sleep in a tent. One of those days was on my way back from the Arctic Ocean. A guy that I met in the Yukon, in Whitehorse, Yukon, the capital there. He let me stay in his RV on his property. Super cool guy. He actually runs an Arctic motorcycle tour company that does tours with, like, they'll fly up and rent a bike and go up and do this. Wow. But that was my first time. That was just under a month in. And so that was my first time in almost a month sleeping not on the ground, which was nice. And then I did get one hotel just kind of on my way back because I was going to be home, in 2 days or whatever. And I knew I was going to try and put in like a 12-hour riding day the next day. So I wanted some good sleep.
I don't know, man. 33 nights of camping, something like that, and 2 nights of hotel. It's still, like, especially in bad weather. So what was the weather like? And I guess what time of year was it that you went, just for context?
So I left on June 18th,
Okay.
and I got back home at the end of July.
Okay.
But the weather, we actually had fantastic weather for the cliff diving portion in Oregon. It was hot, so you wanted to be in the water. No rain, nothing like that. That was good. But then the day that I left, all the cliff divers in Oregon, I got stuck in a rainstorm riding up to the Canada border, and then in Vancouver, when I got in there itself, I did a tire change. Got the tire change just fine, no worries. And then I go to leave, and my bike wouldn't start, and it's like pouring rain on me. I finally ended up bump starting it, where I like run with the bike, and then I like manually turn the engine over by releasing the clutch while it's in second gear. Got it to start, stopped to get some gas, bike wouldn't start again, and I'm like, oh, the battery's shot. And so I'm like bump starting this bike all over the city of Vancouver, like during a rainstorm, trying to find a place that has a battery that would fit in the bike.
Wow.
Yeah, and then on the way up, I did have a lot of good weather days riding through Yukon and British Columbia. But the weather's weird up there because you're kind of hugging the coast most of it, and there's like a lot of mountain ranges you're in between. So I'd have, most of the day it would be sunny and warm and beautiful, and then out of nowhere you would just get like a downpour, and you kind of be following the downpour on the bike, and if you stopped, it would probably pass you. So there was a lot of that, and then when I got to the Dempster Highway, that dirt highway that goes up to the Arctic, I had been warned that the main problem when it's dry is it's dusty. So like it's the main reason for that road is to get supplies to those small indigenous people's communities in the Arctic. And so there is semi-truck traffic on there. And so when it's dry, the semi-trucks will pass you, and the dust will be like a mile long, and you just cannot see through it. That's actually how a lot of the deaths on that highway happen. Is people will get caught behind a car or a semi-truck, can't see, and they'll either crash the bike or they'll hit. Just a couple of days before I went there, that happened to somebody, and they ran in headfirst into an oncoming truck and died.
Oh my God.
But when it's wet, the issue is the road gets extremely slick. It's mostly loose gravel, and they use some binding agent. I forget what it's called, like calcium something. But when it gets wet, the road is the consistency of marbles covered in like snot. And so that's what I had the whole way up was the marbles covered in snot.
Is this a common, like, are there a lot of people that try to attempt this by motorcycle?
So this year, there definitely was a lot higher traffic. So the road itself was finished. I want to say it was either 2018 or it was late 2017. And so the first year it got finished, people started going up by motorcycle just to, because there's only a few places in the world where you can actually ride a motorcycle or drive a car to the ocean itself. So people started doing that 2018, the first year, 2019 a little bit, and then 2020 we had the pandemic.
Yeah.
And so you couldn't do it then because all of the communities there were closed, and you have to basically stop at each of the communities and get fuel because the distances are so vast between fuel because of the remoteness that, so if you can't get fuel at one of the stops, there's no way for you to go down that road. You can't even make it to where the fuel would be and then turn around unless you had like some crazy amount of gas in your tank.
Yeah.
And then, 2021, 2022, and 2023, the effects of the pandemic were still kind of being felt in those communities just because they are really small indigenous communities. They were not opened up much. And then this year, it was kind of the first year since the pandemic that people were like, oh, we can go. There's no restrictions. We don't have to do anything, special or get any special permissions. So there was a lot more traffic this year, and as a result of that, there was a lot more accidents, and there was definitely a few motorcycle deaths and passenger car deaths as well.
I mean, it sounds like, obviously a lot of hazards, like you're on a motorcycle, so you don't have, and you're camping at night, so you're pretty much exposed the entire time. And then you've got all of these physical danger hazards like oncoming traffic in this road. I guess I'm just curious, like, were you mentally prepared for all of that going into this trip?
I think I was mentally prepared, and that in like kind of a weird way, I was just kind of taking it as it went. Like I didn't expect the conditions that I had. I knew that they were a possibility, but obviously kind of going up, you hope for the best weather. And, just a couple days before I got onto the Dempster, it was 70 degrees and sunny for like 3 weeks prior. So I was kind of expecting that weather. But on the way up, it was kind of just, you get somewhere and it's raining, but you're kind of like enjoying that it kind of sucks in a weird way, because you're like, wow, I'm in like this. You get kind of this more like out there feeling, I think,
Yes.
as opposed to when it's like all sunny and nice. Yeah, it might be beautiful and you still get to appreciate it, but it's like when you're kind of out there and you're like, wow, I am 8 hours drive from the nearest civilization, and I am by myself, and the weather sucks right now. Like this is kind of a survival situation, and I think that's kind of cool.
I wonder if I could ask you to just go one level deeper on that. This idea that you enjoy the suck.
Yeah.
You said like you have to enjoy that it sucks.
Yeah. I'm a big fan of Type 2 fun.
Type 2 fun.
Yeah, I have a pretty strong like mountaineering and climbing background, and there was just that's kind of like what drew me to that side, like climbing and all that, was just that you'd be out, it would be physically hard, obviously, especially mountaineering, because you're carrying like weight and it's high altitude and there's all the conditions and stuff. But then you get hit with like a snowstorm or something and you're at like 13,000 feet, and it's like, this is cool. Like, it's like, I think it's cooler than if it was like everything goes to plan, because it's, if you make it out, like you have a little bit more of a story to tell. Yeah. Whereas if everything goes to plan, it's still cool and it's awesome that you went there, but then you get back down. I feel like you get like a little cheated when that happens.
Yeah. Man, I think we've heard Type 2 fun on this podcast before, but for listeners, like, what is Type 2 fun?
Type 2 fun is it's something that is not fun while it's happening, but it is fun to look back on and think about it. So, while it's happening, you're like, man, this sucks. Like, I wish I wasn't here right now, but you keep pushing through. But then those memories that you get to look back on, you're like, I'm so glad I did that. That was awesome. And I think that the value of Type 2 fun is so much higher because, imagine you're on a 2-day mountaineering trip or whatever. If you have Type 1 fun, if it's just fun the whole time, you get 2 days of fun. That's awesome. But you're probably not gonna, you're not gonna think about it too much after that. Whereas Type 2 fun, it's not fun for those 2 days, but then you get a lifetime of fun looking back on it.
Yeah. What is the value of that, of those memories, of the lifetime of looking back on it? And I mean, I just think like there's plenty of people in this world that look at so-called Type 2 fun and they're like, oh, I'm not doing that. There's just like, talk to the hand. That's not for me. Like what is that value that you get from the afterwards?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think Type 2 fun, like if you kind of broaden the scope just from like adventure stuff, I think Type 2 fun is kind of a universal experience for anybody who's like gone through something difficult to get a reward, So it's like if you went to college and college kind of was hard and it was a struggle the whole time, but then you get your degree, you're probably going to look back a lot more fondly on your time in college, and then obviously with adventures, it's just a little bit more direct because it's like kind of a physical suck. But I think that's super valuable. I mean, I think at the end of the day, the stories that we have to tell and the memories that we have to look back on are kind of really the whole purpose of all of this.
Yeah. I mean, is it like a confidence thing, or like, just a knowing that you were able to persevere tough conditions, just like this knowing that you were able to get through it?
Yeah, I think that's huge for confidence. I think that kind of the more difficult things that you're able to do, you kind of build this internal resume for yourself that tells yourself, this is who I am. These are the things that I've done. And I feel like that does add a lot to who you are as a person in terms of confidence, because you doubt yourself less and less the more you're able to look back and be like, oh wait, I did this. This was way harder than whatever I'm doing now. I'm sure I'm going to be fine.
Yeah. And so like, there's been a lot of level 2 fun in your life, and I want to make sure we get some time to talk about that. But the interesting thing is that I suspect, and I'm pretty sure it's true for you, that like what's level 2 fun today is, a lot easier tomorrow. And you almost have to keep leveling up that level 2 fun to keep it to continue to make it a struggle. Is that right?
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I think as I get older, I'm starting to notice that the type 2 fun I go through becomes maybe less physical and more mental.
Yep.
I try to keep in good shape for all the adventure sports that I do, but like I'm definitely not in the shape that I was when I was like 21 and climbing and mountaineering every day, you know.
Yeah.
So I think that the motorcycle adventures that I have transitioned to over the last like 5-6 years, they provide more of a mental challenge, and that kind of type 2 fun is awesome. And I think that it's also a little bit more dangerous because it's like when you're out climbing or you're cliff diving, it's relatively short things, and yeah, there's a lot of physical dangers, but for the most part, if you're using common sense and being relatively safe about what you're doing, everything's going to be all right unless something, you know, crazy happens. Whereas with the motorcycle travel, it's like there's things completely out of my control that could happen. You know, a car could hit me, or an animal could run out in front of me, which happened actually quite a few times on this trip. Luckily, I didn't hit anything, but bad weather is a lot more serious because, you know, if you're to the point where you need to pull over and stop, like you could be stopping somewhere that's not safe, you know, in terms of exposure, or just like if you're doing like international travel, you could be stopping by somewhere that's not like a safe place just to be as a foreigner. So I think as it moves on, like the type 2 fun gets harder, but in different ways.
Yeah, I wonder. So one of the things I was thinking about when you talked about that, like you can have this physical level 2 fun, then you kind of talked about taking on this mental level 2 fun. Like I think you could probably even do that with emotion too, right? You know, you start to experience like difficult and challenging emotions that are hard and that suck, but like you can kind of live in that. You can, you know, be intentional about trying to live in that space where, you know, the emotional difficulty becomes almost a level 2 fun. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. I definitely would agree with that.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting. So I want to help listeners kind of that leveling up that happens in the level 2 fun that you've experienced throughout your life. I want to kind of help listeners sort of understand that leveling up that's happened for you. I think before we do that though, like this particular trip to the Arctic Ocean, like what was the draw for this trip? Why this particular trip?
Well, so the Arctic Ocean itself, I first found out about that road during the pandemic. So when I couldn't actually go, I was just looking up cool places to go on the motorcycle, and then ended up coming across like a Reddit thread or something like that about that highway, and immediately started diving into it and was like, this is awesome. And so over the last like 4 years, I've definitely been like looking into it and wanting to go. But the actual kind of like deciding that I was going to do it this year was pretty quick. There's maybe like six weeks maybe between like when I'm like, oh, I have an opportunity to do it, and when I left for it. Cause I had the plans already for 7-8 months to go up to Oregon and film that cliff diving thing. And the original plan was we were going to do the Oregon portion, and then we were going to head up into Canada and go pretty far north into Canada, up above Alberta into Northwest Territories to try and film the first known descent. And I say known because we don't know what people were doing before cameras were around, but first known descent of this waterfall called Alexandra Falls up there. Okay. But then there was this gap between the Oregon part and that part. And I was like, well, I'm not really needed for the parts in between there. And I have about 4 or 5 weeks to do something. And I was like, man, I should just head up. I should make a break for it. And originally I kind of wanted to find somebody to go with, and I made like a Facebook post in this motorcycle group, and lots of people like responded. But at the end of the day, I was just like, I'm just going to go on my own and like see what happens. And it was awesome. I wouldn't have wanted to do it any other way.
What were there like the key highlights for you? Was it the scenery, the geography? Did you see some wildlife? Like what were some of the major highlights for you?
I saw a lot of wildlife. I saw at least 30 black bears just on the side of the road. Maybe more than that. It's hard. They were everywhere. I almost hit a moose, which was tough. That was kind of scary. I saw quite a few moose. Saw elk. Let's see. Saw a lot of foxes. The only thing I didn't see that I wanted to see in terms of wildlife was caribou. I didn't realize that they migrate pretty far away from where I was going in the Arctic during the summer, and they kind of come back in the winter.
Yeah.
But the wildlife was cool. I think the scenery was, I mean, as soon as you get north of Vancouver, British Columbia, it is so gorgeous.
Yeah.
Like I've been up to like Squamish and Whistler and all that plenty of times, and it's beautiful up there, but I'd never been kind of further up than that. And they have a highway called the Sea to Sky Highway that connects Vancouver to a town called Illilouette, which Illilouette, you already feel like you are out there. Like it's, you ride through the mountains for 4 hours. It's gorgeous. You feel like you're like in the Alps or something. And then you get to Illilouette and it's just like this tiny town, and it's, you feel like you're on a different planet compared to the rest of British Columbia.
Yeah. So fun. I've actually been there. I have a coffee mug from there.
Yeah, it's awesome. I stopped in for lunch at Illilouette on my ride up, and there was like some traffic, and I was like, why is there traffic here? Like there's nobody out here. And apparently a big rig had overturned on the highway I was supposed to take. And so they had completely closed that highway. So I actually had to take like a 7-hour detour from Illilouette to get to the next town I was going to, just because a semi truck had flipped over and completely closed off the main highway.
Man, I think I rather would have been on a motorcycle on that, because we were driving an RV, and it was really, really windy roads around that mountain. It's scary. It's tight. Yeah,
there was a lot of RVs. I was honestly surprised. I'm like, it's funny with like on the motorcycle, I ride. I mean, I'd like to say I'm a relatively conservative rider compared to some people, but I definitely take some risks on the motorcycle. But in a car, I'm just like, I drive like a grandma. And so like the idea of driving an RV on that same road like gives me anxiety.
It's really scary. But let's talk about your motorcycle, because that's been part of your adventure here. It's a big part of your adventure. What is it about the motorcycle for you?
I mean, I love bikes. The motorcycle I took for this was a Suzuki DR650, which is it's essentially a big dirt bike. It's not like a touring bike. So like 99% of the other motorcycles I saw on my way up were all big, like BMW GS, like $30,000 adventure touring bikes, and they're awesome machines, but they're basically like couches with wheels. Whereas the DR650 doesn't really have any frills. It's not particularly comfortable. It doesn't have a crazy amount of power. But when you take it off road, it excels so much more. And that was really fun for me because I do come from a bigger adventure bike background, and bringing this like little dirt bike, I felt like I had so much more freedom, because I'd pass like a little like logging road or mining road, which is like 99% of the roads in Yukon. There's only like 2 paved highways in the whole province. But I'd pass one and be like, all right, I'm going to check it out. And I would be able to just rip around on that as if I was on a dirt bike. Explore it until I either decided to turn around or ran into some roadblock or something like that. But I definitely wouldn't have been doing that if I was on a bigger bike. I think the concept of traveling stuff like that by motorcycle too is just it's a lot more of an experience to your senses too, because like when you're in a car, you got your windshield, you probably listen to the radio, whatever. Like I do have music in my helmet, which I listen to quite a bit, but like other than that, like I'm feeling the wind, I'm feeling all the temperature changes, different smells, stuff like that. I feel like you're more in your environment and kind of taking it in that way.
I was going to ask you if you felt sort of more connected to just the environment and the nature around you. It sounds like, yeah,
100%.
Yeah, that's awesome. So you've got this bike, basically can go anywhere, and this Dempster Highway was a big part of the draw for going up there. You and I spoke a couple of days ago, and you made a comment to me that when you were riding on this very dangerous road, there were times I think you said there were times when you felt like the road was trying to kill you.
Yeah, definitely.
And you had to make peace with that. And I wonder if you could just kind of talk about that.
Yeah. So like I said earlier, like when it rains, the road consistency turns into these kind of like snot covered marbles. You don't have like much traction at all. Like you're sliding all over the place. And so you're standing up on the pegs the whole time, which you're supposed to do for a lot of off-road riding, but like doing it over an 800-mile period is difficult. Like that's a workout. But then also you're balancing the bike because it's going to slide. You got to kind of correct it or know when to let it slide underneath you. But sometimes it would be just like kind of sprinkling. So you'd have the road conditions would be slippery, but you're able to see and stuff. But then other times it would just start pouring down and visibility became an issue. So like you can barely see out of your face shield on your helmet, the bike sliding all around. There is still like semi traffic coming mostly in the opposite direction when I was on my way up. So you're riding and it feels like the road is literally trying to push you into oncoming traffic the way you're like sliding around. I had a couple of pretty close calls with trucks, even though I try to ride as far right as possible to avoid that. But I mean, you get to spots where there's these like ruts in the road that were like 8 or 9 inches deep and they would just guide you into the opposing lane, which was tough.
Yeah. So when we spoke, you said like all of this going on, you had to learn to have peace with it. And you even made a statement that said like, if it happens, it happens. And I wonder if you just kind of talk us through like what that felt like, what that was like for you mentally, like how you got to that place.
Definitely. I think that's just kind of also a general outlook I tend to have when I am doing things that have inherent risk with them. But on that ride in particular, it was like, I'm 300 miles from, the nearest people that would be able to help me in any situation. And I know that stopping is just going to delay that because I don't know if the weather's going to get worse than it already is. And so I'm continuing to ride. I'm trying to ride as safely and as best as possible. But I'm definitely every second you're just kind of confronted with near misses, whether that's sliding out and falling off a cliff because there's not really guardrails on a lot of these big drop offs, or hitting another truck or hitting a truck or, wildlife, all that. And so the whole time I was just kind of essentially being present and being like, well, I'm happy that I'm here. I'm happy that I'm doing this. And like, if I go out, it's not really my problem to deal with anymore. So, just kind of deal with it. Try not to die. But if it happens, like you tried your best.
Yeah. Wow. It's a lot. And then I think to add to that, just to kind of want to go one more level, this is essentially a solo trip. I mean, the 5 weeks you did interact with a few people, but for the most part, you were on your own for this trip.
Yeah, so I was alone.
I wonder if just you can talk about like that experience, like all of this that we're talking about, facing your fears, doing these dangerous things, coming to peace with the inevitable, and doing it all kind of in your own head and your own experience without the support of friends, family, other people around you. What's that like?
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously I had a lot of social interaction when I was doing that filming part in Oregon. We had a group of over 100 people. So I was almost like a little over socialized. So I was kind of stoked to get away from the group at first.
Yeah, makes sense.
But then after that, it was like, I knew it was going to be remote, but like it is really remote, especially when you're camping. I was doing mostly camping on like public land. Occasionally I would stop into a campground if there was one near something that I really wanted to see. And then I think 2 times I stayed at like an RV park just because I needed the Wi-Fi to work a bit. But other than that, I was camping just like on public land. So I was by myself camping most of the time. And I didn't really realize, as time went on, like, oh, wow, like this isn't, I am by myself all day. The only interaction I have is maybe I talk to somebody at like a scenic pullout who's going the same direction, or maybe the person that I'm getting gas from. Even though a lot of the times I'm getting gas, I'm just paying by card and there's no interaction there. So it's like several days on end where I'm just like not talking to anybody but myself, essentially.
Yeah.
But it was good. I mean, I think I got used to it the more it went on. And it was kind of nice. Sometimes you kind of like, I feel like you kind of develop this like almost secondary personality kind of when you're by yourself for long periods of time, like, cause you gotta come up with like stuff to think about, and you make up conversations in your head about stuff that's going on in your life. And it was kind of a cool experience.
Yeah. So what do you talk to yourself about? What is that? What is that?
Yeah. Like? This trip for sure, I was, a lot of it was just kind of, thinking about kind of minimizing the gap between what I do for work now and the adventure motorcycle riding. So the whole time was just like, okay, how do I make it so that I can just make a living doing this, just riding a bike to cool places, you know? And so that was a large portion of my thoughts, and kind of going through that and going through schemes. I am self-employed, so it's not like I had like a 9 to 5 to go back to. So I'm lucky in that sense, but I'm just, you know, a lot of it was those conversations. A lot of it was thinking of like, what am I going to do? Like, how am I going to top this? Like, what's the next big trip? You know, how do I have a, you know, even better experience than I'm already having, which was a lot more difficult than it sounds like, because I was having such a good time, you know.
What does level 2 fun look like next time?
Yeah, exactly.
So for listeners, just to bring in some context, because I want to touch on something you just said, but what is your career now? Like when you talked about integrating like this trip with what you currently do, can you just
so I'm a photographer. I've been a photographer full time since I got out of the Army back in 2018, and I do video content as well. I've done kind of every type of photography you can kind of think of. I've done like travel photography, I've done weddings, commercial, portraiture, but now I do mostly school sports photography. So I take like, you know, high schools and youth leagues, like team photos, which it's cool, it's fun. The reason that I like doing it is it's extremely seasonal. So I have like 3 6-week periods throughout the year where I have to work, and then outside of that, I'm still doing things to make money with photography, but like I could live off those 3 6-week periods throughout the year. So I'm able to go out and travel and do these long trips.
Yeah.
I'm moving from that. I'm just like, how do I change that from having to do, you know, kind of what I like call like my adult job photography, into just like taking photos and videos of motorcycles, you know, or you know.
So I'm curious. I mean, five weeks away, you had a lot of time to yourself, and a lot of what you thought about was like, how can I integrate my passion for adventure travel like this with my day job of photography? Like, did you come up with anything?
Yeah. I actually, while I was gone, I already had an idea that I wanted to just kind of film as much as I could and take as many photos as I could. Partly because that's kind of who I am as a person. Just I'm a photographer by trade because I love taking photos and making videos and stuff. But also because I was like, I want to have a huge content bank when I get home, and so I can like make stuff with it. And as I was on the trip, I was coming up with more video ideas and coming up with a practical approach to kind of grow a social media following based solely off adventure motorcycle travel. And so I got home. The day after I got home, I edited my first video, which is something that I filmed when I was at the Arctic Ocean sign, like right in front of it. And since then I've been posting daily. And just in the last 6 weeks since I got home, I've gone from 50 followers on the account to 11,500. I've already gotten a couple of brand deals from it. So I'm like kind of well on the way. I'm hoping by this time next year, I'm able to do it full time.
That's amazing. So you're following your passion, bringing in a skill that you already have. You're kind of like, you said that on your trip, you were thinking about ways you could integrate these two things. And now it seems like it's already just sort of happening for you.
Yeah, it's well on the way. I mean, it's been a lot of work. I did like a little question thing on my Instagram story yesterday. And one of the questions that came up was, how much time do you spend on content? And I tried to figure out the average over the last 6 weeks. And I've been adding about 15 to 20 hours of work each week to create content for that page. So it's definitely been a lot of work, but I think it's further along in 6 weeks than I thought I would have made in 6 months already. So, which is nice.
Well, it's awesome. And I usually save this question for closer to the end, but while we're on the topic, like if people want to kind of engage with you or, you know, find out more about you, check out your work, or even like work with you, like how can people help you achieve this goal?
Yeah. I mean, if you just want to kind of see what I'm doing and check out the stuff I'm making, I'm Moto Photo Guy on Instagram and TikTok, and then Motorcycle Photo Guy on YouTube. Okay. And if you have an outdoor or adventure brand, especially one that's motorcycle centric, all of those have links to reach out to me and we could work together.
That's amazing. Awesome.
Yeah,
Well,
thanks.
hope people do that. So before we move away from your Arctic Ocean adventure, you also mentioned to me that one of your inspirations for this trip was the book and the movie Into the Wild.
Yeah.
And love both of those. Love the soundtrack.
Oh yeah.
Big
Oh yeah.
fan of
Eddie Vedder
Earl
killed it
Jam and
on
Eddie
that.
Vedder. Oh man, he did. And so I just want to kind of touch on that a little bit. Can you talk about how that book inspired and the movie, how that they inspired you to do this trip?
Yeah. Oh well, I mean, I saw read the book and watched the movie my senior year of high school in English class. It was like one of the required readings, and
Wow.
I think it kind of inspired like kind of how I live my life in general. Of leading up to this trip. As soon as I read the book, I almost didn't plan to go to college after high school. I decided I was like, oh, I'm just gonna drop everything. I'm just going to walk across the United States. I was talked out of that by friends and family, and I did end up going to college. I dropped out of college after a year, but that was for other reasons. Yeah, since then it's just like I've always been obsessed with it. Like it's just the outlook on life that Christopher McCandless had is just it resonates so much with me that like. You know, we all kind of live our lives in these boxes to fit into what society tells us we have to do and how we have to live, and kind of it's almost like you know, we're not in control of you know, being the person that we want to be. Whereas Christopher McCandless was like, I have some issues on the moral side of how society's run, and I'm just going to go be out there and do it and be present every moment, every day of my life. And he was up until he unfortunately died. Yeah. But since then, I've kind of lived my life with that kind of same structure. My first, up until a few years ago, I was like after getting out of the Army, I was pretty much transient as well. I lived in a van. I did freelance photo work, didn't make much money, but I was super happy just kind of traveling around, not having a day-to-day routine, kind of living on the outskirts of what people would call like a societal norm. And another part of it too is in the back of my mind, I always know that is a backup plan. Like if everything in my life were to fall apart, I know that I'll be okay, because I'm like, I could just go start walking, and I'm confident that I would survive.
Yeah. Yeah. So I wonder if, like, just for a minute, we can just, I want to dive into it a little bit, because the two things that I remember, and to be honest, it's been a long time. I read the book, watched the movie, but it has been many, many years. Mm-hmm. And the two things I remember is he basically gives away everything he has, including all of his money. And he goes up into the Yukon, right? And he doesn't come back.
Yeah, he goes up to Alaska, just outside of Fairbanks. Yeah. He does not come back. He made a couple kind of big mistakes while he was out there, but he was living off the land and surviving for the better part of a year, which is pretty crazy for somebody who's not like people go out and do bushcraft, you know, and are pretty good at it nowadays. But like, it's just a kid who, you know, didn't grow up doing that. I think that's pretty impressive. But yeah, he decided to drive across the country and just kind of figure things out. His car that he was in, he was parked down somewhere near Lake Mead. His car got totaled in a flash flood while he was sleeping in it. He woke up, he burned his Social Security card, he burned all his money, and he just started walking off into the desert. And for a few years before he headed up to Alaska, he was essentially a transient. You know, he was a vagabond. He would get work here or there at certain places if he needed to, but otherwise he was living off kind of what he could find, and you know, had a pretty positive outlook on it.
Yeah, I mean, it's an inspiring story. I like the story better when they come back and they share their story with others, and then, you know,
yeah, for sure,
us to do the same. So I love that you're doing the photography and you're starting to meld the adventure with the sharing of other people, because personally, I feel like that's what it's really all about, is to go have the experience, but there's an important part where you come back and share with other people to inspire them as well.
Yeah. Well, also, I mean, if the very last words that Christopher McCandless wrote in his little book out there while he was in the thing was "Life only meaningful if shared." So I think that's
damn, there it is. There it is. Life is only meaningful if shared. Awesome. Well, listen, in the time we have left, I do kind of want to just touch on your, like, where your adventure spirit developed from. And I actually, this is really fun. I was just looking at your Instagram page yesterday as I was getting ready for today, and I found a post that you made. And I'm going to paraphrase a little bit because it was longer than this. But you said, I may be 31, but deep down, I'm just the nerdy kid who read Nat Geo and watched eyewitness documentaries. Then you go on to describe some of your adventures. And then you close by saying, deep down, I'm just trying to make that dorky kid inside of me proud.
Yeah.
I loved that. I wonder if you could tell us about that dorky kid.
Yeah. I mean, growing up, I was definitely like super nerdy and dorky. I never got into fiction books. Like I love to read, but I like Harry Potter didn't interest me. Like none of the like fiction stuff that a lot of kids like to read interested me. I would pick up anything that had to do with dinosaurs, animals, geography, stuff like that. And I loved it. My parents had a subscription to National Geographic, and I would comb through every single issue, just like in awe at the photos and the articles about people going out and like doing these real adventures. And the eyewitness documentaries, like if you were growing up in the 90s or even late 80s, I think, because they started then, the eyewitness documentaries were like iconic. Every episode was like on a different thing. They had one on like the Sahara Desert. They had one on the Amazon, the Arctic, and I was just fascinated. And like as a little kid, I was just like, I want to go see that. I want to go see the Sahara Desert. I want to go into the Amazon rainforest. I want to go, walk on ice in the Arctic or the Antarctica, stuff like that. And I think as I've gotten older, those core kind of like wants as a 8-year-old kid, are they're the things that are kind of guiding me. Like I'll see something and I'm like, I got to go do that. Like I have to experience that.
So how many of those things that you just mentioned have you already checked off of your list? Because I think you've already done a number of them, right?
Yeah, I've been to the Sahara. I spent 2 weeks in the Sahara Desert back in 2019. I have been to the Amazon. That was in early 2022. That was January 2022. I spent a week out there, which was super awesome. All just solo trips too, which is great because you meet incredible people when you're like doing that by yourself. And then the Arctic I just did. I haven't been to Antarctica yet. I think Antarctica and the Australian outback are probably the two like biggest ones that I still need to do. I also haven't been to like sub-Saharan Africa. So like, Tanzania or Kenya or Botswana or any of that. But I do have a motorcycle trip planned for Africa. I'm going to fly the bike into Spain, cross the ferry there into Morocco, and then I basically do a U shape around the bottom and then go up to Kenya.
Yeah, man, sounds so cool. We got several more podcast episodes we're gonna have to do at some point.
Yeah.
You got a lot of story to tell. So as a kid, you loved Nat Geo, you loved Eyewitness. Help us connect the dots between like growing up as a kid, young adulthood, and then like that gap between there and kind of where you are now, because there's some story in there too.
Yeah. I mean, growing up, I was obviously into all that stuff. I was also really outdoorsy. We were homeless quite a bit growing up, and so as like a 10-year-old or 11-year-old, you don't really understand what's going on when that happens. So I always thought of a lot like we were just camping a lot. So we would live a few times. We lived in like campgrounds for very extended periods of time. And I didn't realize that we were homeless. I just thought we were camping and I had to go to school in the morning. And so, so I think that had a big impact on it. I love being outdoors. I love sleeping under the stars. And as after I dropped out of college, I got really into rock climbing and mountaineering, and was doing that pretty much with every minute of free time that I had. And I think that had a big impact on who I am now, because now it's just like, when you're young, you kind of take it for granted if you have the freedom to go and do that. And now that I'm older and as I gain more responsibilities as an adult in his 30s, and I have, more things to take care of, now it's just like, every free moment I have, I'm planning, when is the next time I get to go camping? When is the next time I get to go on a trip somewhere?
Right. Can I ask you a question on that? You said that when you were young, like you guys lived sometimes in campgrounds and you resort homeless, like, but you said that when you were a kid, you didn't realize that. Like at what point, what point did you realize that?
So when I was a freshman in high school, we moved into my great grandmother's house on my dad's side, and she was in her 90s and she was pretty sick. We basically had we were getting free rent in exchange for taking care of her, and we had been homeless a few times before that. And then when my great grandma died, there was some kind of internal squabble on my dad's side of the family over what to do with the house, and we went from like we had lived there for about a year, like kind of my whole first like year of high school. And then we had gotten an eviction notice. And we were out in like 3 days, and we were just like, I have very vivid memories of being in our Dodge Caravan. It's me, my mom, dad, my little brother. We had 2 dogs, and just like my parents didn't know where we were going to go. And I think that was like the moment that it clicked. I'm like, oh, we're homeless, and all those times that we were living somewhere that wasn't in a house, we were also homeless. Like it kind of, I think at that point I was old enough to like, it all kind of came together and clicked.
Yeah. So I think what's really interesting for me, and I'd love to ask you, because, you know, I think there are people that might look at that circumstance and say, you know, their life almost becomes motivated by like, I'll never live that way again. But then there's people that use it as like, you know, like you love the outdoors. Like,
oh yeah,
it was almost like a learning experience for you and showing you that you could survive that way, and you've embraced it, and you've leveled it up in your lifetime. And I'm just curious, like your thoughts on the kind of those 2 different directions that you could have gone.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there's a big stigma around homelessness in general. I think a lot of people look at homeless people and they're like, oh, they're there because they got drug problems or mental health problems or whatever. But I mean, in our family's case, like, well, that may have been something on my parents' side. Like as a kid, like I didn't have any personal issues that was causing the homelessness. And it was kind of tough through high school. I stayed with friends most of the time. So I lived with other friends for most of high school. Sometimes I didn't, but as I got older, I kind of made the same mistakes that my parents did on my own when I was like young. Like I dropped out of college. I ended up getting evicted from a place when I was 19. I had a roommate who basically I was giving him my rent money to pay the rent for, and he just wasn't paying it. He was pocketing the money, and so we got evicted. And so I'm like 19 and I'm homeless, but this time it is 100% my own fault.
Yeah.
And from there I realized like I don't want to be in this situation again. And so instead of kind of just giving up on like the lifestyle that I like to have, I decided, I want to just kind of, I bought a van. I lived in the van for a long time, which was amazing. I don't think I could do it now in my 30s. I love having a home office and stuff, but like living in the van was so awesome. If you are young and you have the opportunity to do it, go for it.
Yeah.
And then, I mean, outside of that, I think I definitely look back fondly on a lot of the experiences I had as a result of not having a permanent place to live.
Yeah.
I think it gave me some really good skills in terms of being adaptable to different situations. I think that you can definitely go one of 2 ways. You can be jaded by the experience, or you can kind of have a positive outlook, pick the good, and try not to repeat the bad.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, I see somebody that's really embraced it. Now, we can't miss that you had a short stint in the Army. And can you just tell us about that real quick?
Yeah, I saw an ad for the Army's 18 X-ray program, which is basically it's you go sign up, you get like a special thing in your contract. They send you to infantry basic training, and then right after infantry basic training, you go to airborne school. And then from airborne school, you go to something called SWCC in North Carolina. It's the Special Warfare Center in school. And they give you an opportunity to make it into special forces. So you kind of go straight from civilian to special forces in this pipeline. I was in SWCC for almost 2 years and unfortunately did not make it into special forces. So I had a very non-standard Army experience because SWIC is like way different. So in the regular Army, you have your enlisted members, and then there's all the ranks and all that, and you have your officers who are above the enlisted members. In SWIC, you're all together. So there's like people like me who are 21 and just joined the Army 6 months ago. There is enlisted guys who've been in for 15 years who are trying to make it in, and then there's like officers who are like lieutenant colonels who've been in the Army for also like 12 to 15 years who are trying to lead a special forces group. And you guys don't really have ranks. You're addressing each other by their first name, which is like a big no-no when it comes to officers and enlisted, stuff like that. And so when I ended up not making it, I got sent to the 82nd Airborne, which is also kind of, it's funny because the 82nd is known as being like one of the strictest, like kind of most, like they're real big on like, if somebody's one rank above you, you got to like stand a certain way and talk a certain way. And so it was a kind of a shock doing that. And I was in the 82nd for a year and got out. So a bit of a non-standard experience, but I think that helped with my adaptability too, because in all throughout the Army, you don't have any control over your day to day. And like, you got to wake up early, but other than that, it's like somebody could barge into your room at 11 p.m. say, hey, pack a bag, you're going here for 3 weeks, Yeah. So I think that helps with kind of my mindset on change and stuff that's happening too.
Yeah. So if you were to reflect on your time in the Army and like, the kind of the growth that you experienced and how that experience has sort of contributed to like what comes next in your life, like what would you say?
I mean, I think I was a little salty about the Army and the military in general when I got out, because I didn't make it into a special forces group like I had signed up for. And so I think like I took a lot of the skills that I learned in the Army, and I definitely utilized them in my day-to-day life. But outside of that, like I've been kind of adamant about, I don't know, it's hard to explain. Like I haven't really wanted to use like any of the benefits that I have, because some weird, and it's stupid, but some weird like internal part of me is like, I don't want to let the Army kind of define who I am and how I've gotten to where I am, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's wild. Yeah. So, I mean, your whole life, like, and even in that experience, like when we were talking the other day, like you were talking about how when you walked into the recruiter's office, it was basically 6 days later that you were in the Army. So you're clearly somebody that, in the spirit of level 2 fun or whatever it is, like you're very spontaneous, and it seems like you're somebody that, I don't know if enjoy is the right word, but likes to put yourself into situations that are going to cause you to experience that level 2 fun, experience the struggle, knowing that you can get through it.
Yeah. I think that's, I'm really good at putting myself into situations which cause very big problems that I then have to solve. Right. And I enjoy that. I feel like I get kind of like almost like a little high from overcoming some big problem. And I think subconsciously that is kind of part of, I'm very spontaneous. I think that I'm a big fan of making decisions and kind of figuring out what the decision entails after it's been made. And kind of just figuring out on the fly, improvising how to overcome whatever problems I've just created for myself.
Yeah, no, it's super inspiring. And I mean, I love on this trip that you took, how you are like learning to integrate your skills to be able to share this story. Cause you have a pretty amazing story. You really do. And I hope you'll continue to share it with people. Listen, I alluded to something in the intro and you mentioned it early on, and I can't end this episode without just touching briefly on the cliff diving. You have been a cliff diver. You have filmed and photographed cliff divers. Like, can you talk to listeners just briefly and indulge us a little bit and talk to us about cliff diving?
Yeah, totally. Me and my best friend Nick, we grew up, went to the same high school together, and kind of met there and started. He has been my like climbing partner and mountaineering partner, and he's been cliff jumping kind of his whole life. But then as we're getting into the mountaineering and stuff, we started doing it more together. And this is back in like 2014. We started realizing that there was little pockets other groups of people who liked cliff diving. And by cliff diving, I'm not talking about just jumping off of a cliff, although that is super fun. We're talking about like doing tricks off of relatively high cliffs. So like think 50 plus feet. Oftentimes we've done plenty of 100 plus foot cliffs and waterfalls. So we kind of started getting together with these other groups across the country and kind of making meetups. And we had quite a few of those. And it just kept getting bigger and bigger. The social media channels we were posting to were going viral a lot, and we kind of had an ignition of a freestyle cliff jumping community that is just grown to be huge now. It's so amazing to be out there, like seeing the younger kids. Like there's these kids who we're filming for this documentary who are so much better than we ever were in terms of cliff diving. Like they're doing tricks we could not fathom off of 100+ foot waterfalls. And they'll come up to me, or they'll come up to any of my friends that we were jumping with back in the day. Like, man, when I was in the 5th grade, I saw your YouTube video and it inspired me to get into it. And that's kind of what this documentary is about. It's a sequel to another feature-length documentary that my friend Nick put out, what was that, 6 years ago now, maybe. And it's kind of about the next generation of cliff divers. But in our time jumping, like we were lucky enough to travel kind of all over the world to do it. We would work with tourism companies and just certain, outdoor brands in general. And we would be able to like fly to different countries and jump off their waterfalls and kind of do tours of their country, cliff jumping themed. We did one in Costa Rica where we made like national news in Costa Rica, which was super cool. Canada, Switzerland, it was an awesome experience. I was in a pretty bad motorcycle accident in 2019, and since then I haven't jumped as much. I still get out there every once in a while, but it's I'm still definitely integrated in the community, and it's an amazing community to be a part of.
Yeah, if people want to kind of get a taste, is there some place they can see some of your work or photography related to cliff diving?
Yeah, I do have an Instagram. That's Huckster McGee, which is kind of hard to spell. It's HUCKSTERMCGEE, and that that's got probably 1,000 different videos and photos of cliff jumping over the years of myself and of all my friends and stuff like that. But if you want to if you really want to dive in and watch it, just look up Nick Coulter on YouTube, or just Nick Coulter cliff jumping, and watch any of his films. They are fantastic. They're very well produced, and they really dive into like all the different places and waterfalls and what goes into it, the safety measures, stuff like that. So
I want to ask you 2 questions before we wrap up on the cliff diving piece. First of all, like jumping off, let's just call it a 100+ foot cliff. Like, what does that feel like?
100+ feet is awesome. So nowadays, the younger guys who are jumping, they're doing these crazy tricks. They're doing like triples and quads, and they're throwing in all these spins. I was known for just doing big single gainers. A gainer is it's a backflip, but you take off taking forward, and so you kind of like go backwards. But doing that off 100 feet, I think, is like probably the closest thing you can get to flying. Because like I've skydived quite a bit, and it's just a different feeling because you have no spatial reference when you're skydiving. Like you can see the ground, but it's pretty far away. There's nothing around you to kind of see. Whereas when you're jumping off a 100-foot cliff, like there's a wall or a waterfall inches from your face that you're kind of watching. And it's kind of this ultimate like flow state. You're completely in the moment. Your body knows what to do. And you're just kind of time feels like it's slowed down 1,000%, especially waterfalls. Because you'll be falling and you'll lock eyes on a drop of water from the waterfall, and you're falling at the same speed as it. So you can just watch that one drop of water the whole way down until you got to bring it back around to your feet. But
oh my gosh, that's wild. Okay, and then the second question is the more practical one here. But for people that are listening that are like, oh, Tyler jumps off of 100-foot cliffs, I'm going to go do that too. And I know you've got the documentaries, people can find out more, but very quickly, like talk about like the safety aspect and the sort of the build up and the training. It's not for anybody to just show up and jump, right? I mean, talking about that piece for those listening.
Yeah, we are super safety minded when it comes to cliff jumping, and we try to show that in all our films. But one of the big things is depth checking. For big waterfalls, we will spend multiple days scoping out the water in the landing zone to make sure that there's no hazards in there. Just because it looks deep doesn't mean that it is deep. It doesn't mean that there's not debris down there. There are dozens of cliff jumping related deaths every year, mostly from people jumping into water that's too shallow. Or jumping off heights that they're not comfortable with yet and landing badly. Over 60 to 70 feet, you can really damage yourself if you land badly. So when you get up into the 100-foot, it can be life or death, just the difference of a couple degrees of how you're landing. So if you're interested in doing it, find some friends, start small, and definitely make sure that whatever you're jumping into, is at least 10 to 15 feet deep. If you're jumping off something that's higher, make sure it's even deeper than that.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for sharing that. So, as we kind of wrap up here, and I guess as we kind of talk about like putting yourself into difficult situations in order to become a problem solver and work your way out, in the spirit of that, what advice do you have for people that are listening to this episode that maybe have been shy about putting themselves in difficult situations?
I mean, I say this a lot to a lot of different people, but I think if everybody has something that they want to do in life and something that they're thinking about, and if you're worried about not, if you're worried about what's going to go wrong, or that you're not ready for it, or that you just need more time, I think that you're never going to do it. And so whatever your thing is, the only thing that's going to get you to do it is just getting out there and doing it. And it's not going to go how you plan, no matter how well you prepare. The timing's never going to be right. But if you go out and do it, even if you fail, you can try it again, and you're going to be way better off for it.
Yeah, man, I love that so much. Tyler, there's so much we haven't talked about. You have such an epic story. There's so many different aspects to your story. And I know that at some point, Hollywood's going to find out about you, and they're going to want to make a movie about you and your life. And I want to know, when they do, who's going to be the Hollywood actor that's going to play you in your movie?
I think, if we were just going off somebody who looked more accurate, I think Jude Law.
Nice. Well, I haven't gotten that one before. I like that a lot.
Yeah, Jude Law probably. If we're going off somebody who's going to match my personality, I'm thinking probably Danny McBride.
Okay, nice. Okay, I love it. What's your movie going to be called?
Oh man, I would just call it Into the Wild 2.
Nice. Oh man, that's awesome. Into the Wild 2. Okay, that's great. Well, man, thank you so much for spending time with me today. And just to reiterate, people can find you on Instagram at Moto Photo Guy, and also Huckster McGee. Any place else people should look if they want to interact with you or find out more?
I would say YouTube. Most of my YouTube right now is just things I've posted on Instagram, but I've been working on several long form, short film videos from a bunch of trips, including the Arctic trip, and those will all be there. That's going to be populated here in the next month or two with a lot of longer videos. And the YouTube is just Motorcycle Photo Guy. Got it.
Awesome. Perfect. Well, thank you again for spending time with me today. And for those listening, I hope you've been inspired today as much as I have. I hope Tyler's story has encouraged you to listen to the voice inside that calls you to adventure, because we want to hear your story next. If you have a story to tell or just need a nudge to create one, please send me an email. We'd also appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word by leaving a review and sharing or tagging Inspire Campfire in your social media. And until next time, I want to encourage you to get outside. Thanks for listening. Tyler, thank you so much for being here, man. This was awesome.
Thanks for having me.